Welcome to another episode of A Servant's Heart podcast, where you will hear about women loving others through service, fun times, helping others, and opportunities to join us ladies of the Statesville Women's Club to also be a servant with heart.
Well, good morning, and welcome to another episode of A Servant's Heart podcast. We are excited, Dana, to have Christy Wells, co-founder of the Safehouse project from Charlotte, with us on Zoom. And Dana's going to go ahead and interview you, Christy. Thanks for joining us.
Wonderful. I'm glad to be here.
Good morning, Christy. It's so good to see you. I'm going to give you a brief introduction of Christy Wells. She is the leading expert in the fight against human trafficking, which is a major issue.
It is.
Major issue. Christy co-founded the Safehouse project in 2017. She was inspired to take action after understanding the high volume of this criminal activity in the United States, combined with the lack of safe and supportive housing options for those who are experiencing trafficking. What a horrible thought. What an absolutely horrible thought to have to deal with. The Safehouse project has become a unifying leader in the anti-trafficking field. The organization has raised millions of dollars to support the launch of new homes, safe homes, across America for trafficking survivors, helped hundreds of victims escape their traffickers and find placement into these safe homes.
Nice.
And then trained hundreds and thousands to spot, to report, and to prevent trafficking. Additionally, the Safehouse project convenes more than 500 stakeholders in the Trafficking Survivor Equity Coalition. As a human trafficking expert who regularly advises federal and state legislators and Fortune 500 companies, Christy advances a coordinated, collaborative, public-private national response to trafficking in America. So, Christy, if you could just tell us a little bit more about yourself and maybe how you got into this field and where you are taking us.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me on here today. It's such an honor to be here. A little bit about me. I am a wife. I am a mother of three. In fact, my twin boys turned 13 today.
That's right.
And I have been a military spouse for 20 years. My husband just retired, and now I am back in the Charlotte area. For me, my journey in the fight against trafficking really began when I was 16 years old on a missions trip in Costa Rica. I went there with my school, with Charlotte Christian. And at the time, they took us out into the outskirts of San Jose, and they took us onto a hill. And as we stood on this hill on the foundation of a building that was intended to be built, we looked out over this valley, and this valley was full of tents, and these tents were full of children as young as age 6 that were being sold into the commercial sex trade by their family. And I was just so heartbroken. The place where my feet were standing, the building intended to be built, was what I now know to be a safe home. It was a place where once they helped these children escape, they were getting education and life skills training and therapy to heal from the trauma that they'd endured. But not just that, they were also bringing in the families, because oftentimes it was the families who had sold these children, thinking that they were selling them to somebody or giving them to somebody that had promised a better life, promised to get them out of San Jose, promised to give them a freedom and a future. And the fact is they ended up enslaved. And so while they wouldn't just bring in the kids, they would help educate the families and equip the families to fight this evil. I came back from Costa Rica with my heart on fire. I had seen something I couldn't unsee, but as life had happened and going into my senior year of high school and then into college, life kind of took its wave, and kind of took me with it. I met my husband when I was in college and married and became a military spouse living all over. But that burden in my heart never left. And so in 2017, my co-founder, Brittany Dunn, and I were in a Bible study together. And a friend of ours, a Christian hip hop artist, was going to South Africa and he saw a need in South Africa to build up a safe house to protect girls that were at risk of trafficking. Well, both Brittany and I had the same heart to respond to trafficking. And so we said, I'm in. How can we help raise money? How can we help support this mission? And we did. And we got that safe home built. But as we began doing that, people started to say, that's great, but what are you going to do here? We didn't have an answer because we didn't understand the problem. We thought, here. Both of us had seen our husbands travel around the world to combat a foreign enemy, where tyranny and human trafficking existed, but we couldn't understand why in the land of the free and the home of the brave, everything was pointing to the fact that we have more people enslaved today than any other point in modern history. So what we saw at that point in 2017 was Department of Justice had just issued a report stating 300,000 American kids sold for sex in the United States every year. And we thought, how in the world is that possible? But then we realized that once they were escaped, or only 1% of them were ever identified. Right. So 300,000, only 3,000 were ever being identified, were ever escaping. And then we realized without a safe place to go, once they were identified, 80% of those 1% would end up back in traffickers' hands. And in 2017, we only had 100 beds in safe homes for minors across the United States, which meant we left 2,900 kiddos that were escaping to say, I'm sorry, but there's no room at the inn. Oh. And so we launched an organization to do a couple of things, but as God does, he continued to stretch and grow our vision and our resources to create what it is today. So today, Safehouse Project is a national leader in the fight against human trafficking. We lead in a few coordinated ways. First, we work to increase victim identification through education. As you said earlier, we work to train and equip individuals to spot, report, and prevent trafficking where they live, work, and play, because the reality is most people don't understand what human trafficking looks like in our communities. And so when we don't understand it, we can't spot it. Right. And so we do work to increase that victim identification above 1%. But then, as I said, without a safe place to go, 80% experience re-victimization. And so we work to be the bridge to help survivors who are escaping, adults and minors, enter into safe housing. And this is where they can get education and life skill training and therapy and everything they need to rebuild their identity and their boundaries and their self-worth, and understand that they have dignity and value and worth as a human being and not as a commodity. Absolutely. We're able to do that well because we spent the last 6 years helping to fund, to mentor, and to launch and certify new safe homes across the United States. So we've trained over 300,000 people to identify trafficking. We have helped over almost 800 survivors escape. We served 530 last year alone. That's great. And this year, our team is on a mission to serve 1,500 survivors escaping their trafficking situation and get them placed into safe homes. And we've helped add 478 new beds to the national landscape for newer expanding safe house programs. So really making sure that we can increase capacity. And as I said, we do a lot on the state and federal level to advise policy, because we have to have policy and that public-private partnership in order to strengthen our ability to respond as the anti-trafficking field to support survivors.
Right. Wow. Okay.
I'm just overwhelmed. I mean, just chills just thinking about everything that you've seen and what you've accomplished and how far we have to go. So, Shelley, I know we both have some questions, so why don't you start?
So, so money makes the world go round. So, where does Safehouse Project receive their funding?
Yeah, it's from a variety of different ways. We have a lot of private funding, individuals. We have corporations, corporations who partner with us. here locally, Speedway Children's Charities is one of our
Nice.
tremendous supporters. The American Hotel and Lodging Association partners with us. We did receive funding this year from Mecklenburg County. So those were federal funds that were pushed down through the county. And so we do have state and federal grants. We do have private grants, private contributors, et cetera.
Wow.
That's good.
So a lot of different ways.
So once again, kind of going over for viewers that might not even really understand what a safe house is. So the safe houses, once again, are important because it allows a place for the survivors to land.
It does, because when they're coming out of their trafficking situation, most of them, I mean, it's sometimes 7-8 times that they try to escape. And what they've historically been met with is maybe a domestic violence shelter that will give them a roof and a bed for a short time, but it's not addressing the complex trauma that comes from trafficking and the trauma bonds that are there, and the broken down identity that is unique to trafficking. And so without that, and without that proper therapeutic support and rebuilding their ability to make money, their perspective on money, their perspective on work, their perspective on a job, their perspective on themselves, then it's very difficult for them to break free of that cycle of victimization. So safe homes are all across the United States. They're individual 501c3s. They're their own nonprofits.
Okay.
And they're so there's a few different ways they can look. There's emergency homes, which serve survivors right as they're exiting their trafficking situation. Those programs are really kind of the triage. It's, who are you? Do you need detox? Because oftentimes traffickers will use drugs to keep somebody compliant.
Right.
Do you know who you are? Do you have any identification? Do you have children that we need to find? Do what are all of these different pieces? It's really trying to understand and who they are, what they need, and stabilize them so that we can then move them to that next phase. That next phase is emergency homes can be anywhere from 2 weeks to 90 days. That next phase are long-term safe homes. And those are usually 6 months to sometimes, a year and a half. And that is where, again, they're they're living in a residential home. Usually it's about, I'd say no more than 10 women, but usually kind of 6 to 8 is our sweet spot of the number of women that will live in a home. They all have their own bedroom. Typically they have their own bathroom. It's usually a secluded property where they have, space to go out and roam and be outdoors and do the things that they need to just heal. But they'll have therapists come in, they'll do group therapy, they'll have a schoolroom typically where they're able to re-enter into schooling, either get a GED or start on maybe college education, or sometimes they're just beginning from the start. Especially for some of our kiddos that have experienced familial trafficking, they are sometimes they've never been in school, or they've been in school very, very little. And so education is a really key component, because that is the thing that leads to that economic independence. They will do skilling for adult programs. They'll do really work to help them understand transferable skills, do resume building, interviews, et cetera. So then the next phase is transitional housing. And this is where it is really focused on that economic independence. They're now working, maybe have a stable housing environment, and they are saving money in order to then eventually move out on their own. But it's less scheduled day programming. It's really kind of working around like, hey, we have therapists. It's your responsibility to book the appointment with your therapist. We have these groups, but it's your responsibility to come to the groups. So it's really trying to set them up for those next steps once they move out of the program.
Okay. Well, kind of jumping forward a little bit, but based on some of the things that you've just talked about, one of the things that my head went to is television. And there are all of these shows on television that sometimes bring trafficking into the show, or there are a lot of myths out there, I think, about what human trafficking is. And do the shows on television, for example, make it worse, or do they help the cause, or how does that play in?
No, that's a great question. Honestly, I'll be kind and I'll say it's both. What ends up happening, even with the movie Sound of Freedom, our phones rung off the hook in the entire anti-trafficking field. Phones were blowing up for months. Oh my gosh, I've seen Sound of Freedom. I'm so excited. I'm so passionate about this. I want to get involved. I want to go rescue kids. And what they didn't realize was that this doesn't look like illegal immigrants shackled in a basement.
Right. No.
This doesn't look like what Hollywood presents. Therefore, the solutions that were proposed, and now there's organizations that have launched as a result of that movie,
right,
that have no path. I actually had one of them call me the other day and they said, we're about to do a rescue operation and we're going to go get 6 kids out.
Oh my.
And we need you to move them across the United States. Well, they were moving them. They were wanting to rescue them out of a satanic ritual abuse cult. Well, the reality is, in those situations, most of the time, you're dealing with familial trafficking in satanic ritual abuse. These kids are born and bred for this, which means the parents still have custody, which means if you pull out a kid and you transport them across state lines, without having custody, you are now liable for kidnapping.
Right.
And the programs within the state don't exist, or the need for the programs within the state that have the ability to handle that high level of care don't exist. And so solutions were created without truly understanding the issue, but then we're creating more problems, because then I'm like, you're going to go and pull these kids out. You're going to end up in trouble. They're going to end up right back in the hands of their traffickers, and whatever they've told law enforcement, they're going to get the beating for. So it's, so it was really, it's damaging. You have to take the time to understand this issue. The reality is, the way trafficking is presented in movies and on TV is often not what it looks like, because it's usually presenting it in the form of some level of abduction. Only 4% of trafficking is abduction. More than 40% of child trafficking victims are first trafficked by the family member. And 66% of trafficking victims are first trafficked by somebody they know and trust. And so this is a family member. This is a significant other. This is a friend. And so when I'm grateful that people say human trafficking is real. And this, the things that happen in the news or in the media elevate their awareness that it's really a thing. But we have to move people beyond awareness into understanding in order to create active solutions that are helpful. And so I think it's, and to get them looking for the kids in their community. If we don't realize that this is happening in our schools, in our churches, in our grocery stores, on our kids' sports teams. And we have a friend, she was a preschool teacher, and she was trafficked by a parent of one of her students. And so if we don't realize where this can happen and how it can happen, we are missing the opportunities to be the eyes and ears of our community.
Thank you for sharing that. I know that Shelley is particularly interested, and I am too, but in the Charlotte metro in our area.
Yeah. So, a question is, the Charlotte metro, does that area have a particular draw for human trafficking? I read that North Carolina is in the top 10%. How about Charlotte? Because Statesville is a bedroom community of Charlotte metro.
Yeah. So let me reframe that a little bit, because I get this question a lot in Charlotte. So yes, there is a report that says North Carolina is in the top 10 states. Sometimes it's number 6 for human trafficking reports. And Charlotte metro is the number one city in the Carolinas for human trafficking reports. But as I'd said previously, victim identification is only at 1%, and you can't solve a problem you don't see. And so as we work to increase victim identification, trafficking reports go up. And so it is, I sat with Lieutenant Governor Robinson. He spoke at our gala a couple years ago, and I kind of challenged him. I said, listen, everybody says that we are, this is horrific, that we are so high, but we can't solve a problem we don't see. And we have to train and equip our communities, because if our trafficking reports go up, guess what? Now we can create more effective solutions.
That's right.
Now we can create more effective legislation. Now law enforcement has the ability to actually prosecute cases, or judges have the ability to prosecute cases. So there are more things that can come out of this. But if we say we don't want any trafficking reports, that just means we don't want to see the problem.
Right.
And so human trafficking happens all over the United States. It happens in rural Missouri. It happens in Montana. It happens in North Dakota. It happens in major metropolitan areas. So there is naturally going to be an increase in the number of trafficking reports because of largely populated areas.
Sure.
And so Charlotte is one of those. I'm often told that because of the thoroughfare of I-85, that it increases the trafficking. But I want you to understand that of the minors that have been trafficked in Charlotte that have been identified by law enforcement, over 98% of those are Charlotte residents.
Wow.
And so it's really easy for us to go, oh gosh, they're just, it's coming from somewhere else. The traffickers are coming from somewhere else. They're moving them somewhere else. It's here. One of the very first cases we ever had was a 13-year-old little girl. And this was in Charlotte. And she'd been pulled out by law enforcement, and she had been sold for 3 years, not by somebody who kidnapped her, not by a creepy man up the street, not by the creepy man in the white van, but by her grandmother. And she had been sold for 3 years to pay the family's bills. Her grandmother had sold her mom as well. And once her mom became too drug addicted and STD ridden to be abused, they turned to her when she was 10 years old. And so, again, if we perpetuate the narratives that it's only because of I-85 that this is an issue, again, we're not digging into our communities to say, what are the systems that are creating vulnerabilities? Where are children slipping through the cracks? Because she had been missing from school for 2 years at that point, and nobody had ever reported it.
That's amazing.
And so yes, I'm on a mission to make North Carolina number one in human trafficking reports, because once we get there, then we can start creating solutions.
So I noticed from your website that you're working with several states to advance human trafficking legislation. So my question, of course, is typically we're going to look at North Carolina. And what sort of legislation are we seeing in the works or recently signed into, I don't know what the terminology is, but to be effective and get on the books?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are working in a variety of states. There is tremendous legislation that's being passed. Texas did some a couple years ago where they increased the penalties for buyers, because the fact is we wouldn't have a supply if we didn't have a demand.
Absolutely.
And so they made first-time sex buying a first-degree felony.
Nice.
And when you do something like that, there is right now human trafficking is a high reward, low penalty crime.
Right.
And so we have to start flipping those scales in order to really move things along. Virginia created legislation mandating age verification of users for any porn sites. And there is a strong correlation between early introduction to porn and those who end up being purchasers of sex. And so that is a grooming field as well. And so, again, how do we curb demand? And so that legislation ran Pornhub out of Virginia. They could not legally operate there. Virginia just had another piece of legislation around vacatur. for survivors. So oftentimes survivors are, while they're being trafficked, are forced into criminal activities by their traffickers. And that's used as a coercion method when when the traffickers say, now you can run away, but if you do, you're going to end up in jail.
Right.
And so they will intentionally force that. And so when we allow expungement of records and vacatur for survivors, that is a really key piece to allowing them to have economic independence later, because otherwise they've got criminal records that, even though they were the victim, still follow them and impact their ability to have gainful employment. And so those are all great things. But the fact is, in North Carolina, we are way, way behind the times in terms of what other states have done. Florida, Georgia, Texas are three key states that have done phenomenal work. Tennessee, phenomenal work in anti-trafficking legislation. But right now, the approach historically has been a little bit of a whack-a-mole of, okay, well, we'll do this piece of legislation here and this piece of legislation here. And each of these takes, a full session, maybe 2 or 3 to get it through. And then they're excited about it. But the fact is, there's maybe 2 other laws that are kind of counteracting it. And so this comprehensive approach hasn't been taken. And in 2000, when trafficking was made illegal in the United States, it was done federally through the Trafficking Victim Protection Act. Well, that required that every 5 years, that legislation be reauthorized for it. So it's the Trafficking Victim Protection Reauthorization Act. They kind of change the name each time they go. But that is the key federal piece of legislation that each year or each 5 years expands the provisions to prevent trafficking, prosecute traffickers and buyers, and protect victims. And so it is really robust. It is the thing that brings about federal funding for domestic and international initiatives to combat trafficking. And all of these, federally, all of these areas of vacatur, of penalties for traffickers and buyers, of funding for housing, of certification for housing, all of those things kind of get shoved into that bill. That's great. And that's been done federally. There's no version of that that's been happening on the state level. And so this last year, we worked with Senator Alexander from Mooresville, Statesville area. And there is the most comprehensive piece of human trafficking legislation that's ever been written. Is I would say months away, maybe less than a month away from getting introduced here in North Carolina. And it is going to be a game changer. It is the very first state in the nation to ever introduce something like this. And there are so many states hungry for this exact same thing to start replicating it out, because what it's going to do is address all of these different issues and tie one piece of legislation to strengthen the other one, because we don't have high prosecution rates. But the fact is, we don't have strong enough legislation to go after the traffickers and the buyers. And so we have to have strong legislation for them to have a penalty or assign a criminal activity to it. And so I'm very excited. I'm very hopeful that this is going to be a game changer, not just for North Carolina, but for the nation.
Well, that would be powerful. Very, very powerful. And I think that you kind of led up into where Shelley and I were both thinking is, our natural inclination is a call to action. What can we do? I know contacting our legislature is important. But what are some of the things that we could do as average citizens to help with trafficking in some way?
Absolutely. Well, as I stated, it really begins with understanding victim identification. That is, we can never make headway to eradicate human trafficking without being able to see and effectively respond to this issue. And so we believe that it takes millions of eyes on this issue to respond and to say, not in my community. And so the way that we have set it up for people to engage is to take the free training. It's at iamonwatch.org. It's a free 1-hour training that equips you to understand what trafficking looks like. There are 25 different business models of human trafficking. So it can look,
Wow.
people always say, well, what are the signs and indicators of trafficking? And my response is usually, well, it depends on what kind of trafficking you're talking about, because what's happening in an illicit massage business is going to look extremely different than a minor being trafficked by a family member. And so, or those that are being trafficked by peers, or those that are experiencing some other form of force, fraud, or coercion. And so when you take the training, it goes through a variety of different business models. And the most common ones that we see, it goes through and these are all done with real survivor stories. So survivors bravely shared their stories, not the horrific things that happen behind closed doors, but they talked about their intersection points with community members. How did the traffickers start grooming them? How did these behaviors start? What were the signs and indicators that were present in their grooming situation and in their trafficking situation? And who were they interacting with that could have seen these things? And so when we equip people through that training, then it makes them more aware of what could be happening in their own community. If you go into schools, if you're a soccer coach, or if you're a youth pastor, or if you are a teacher, or if you're just a parent, or an aunt or an uncle, just knowing what this could look like is essential, because anybody can be trafficked, I think is the reality of this. Those who have high education levels, those who have money, those who are poor, those who are from the wealthiest parts of Charlotte, they all stand chances of being trafficked. And so when we remove the blinders of who we believe the victims are and who we believe the traffickers could be, and educate ourselves on the signs, that is the most powerful action step that anybody can take to step into this issue.
And that's 1 hour training.
The 1 hour training.
Wow.
That's great.
Knowledge is power. And then that allows us to act.
Yes.
Absolutely.
I saw that you had a new curriculum, God's Heart to Eradicate Trafficking, which sounds really exciting. So I do have a question. If a church wanted to deploy that curriculum, how did they get involved with that?
Yeah, that was one that was kind of commissioned by Right Now Media. They came to us and said, what if you created a curriculum to mobilize church leadership to equip the body of Christ to respond to trafficking? Not going to lie, that felt like a tall order. And it was very daunting, but God is so good. But so that is really done as a training. You can access it for free on Right Now Media. So many churches have access to that training. If you don't have access to it, you're welcome to reach out to Amber, Amber, at safehouseproject.org. She is a survivor leader on our team who is spearheading that initiative to integrate that into churches across the United States.
Nice.
So she can set you up. But really what you're going to find is a Bible study that takes you through kind of the reshaping and the reframing of this issue, and then addressing God's heart to respond to this, and then equipping you with the tools you need based upon the unique framework of your church to respond to this issue. Because what we know is that the body of Christ is all has different skill sets, and I see that very reflective of the church overall. Different churches are equipped in different ways. Some are really built to go into low-income communities. Some are really equipped to go into schools and to serve. Some are going into those who are to serve those who are experiencing homelessness. And so based upon where your church's natural tendencies are and natural giftings are, there's ways to incorporate a human trafficking response within those. Because we said early on, human trafficking is in its own ministry pillar, or it doesn't have to be, because it intersects so many different areas of ministry already. So we are so grateful for this training, and we're so grateful for the just the army of believers that are coming alongside us.
That's amazing. So specifically, other than training and beyond training, it's because I don't want to say that that's not important. It's the foundation that everyone should have. How can someone, or say our clubs, Rotary clubs, whatever, get involved with Safehouse Project? And in what ways can a group or an individual support survivors?
Yeah. Funding is always a deep need, and I know everybody knows that,
Sure.
but about $800 to $1,000 helps a survivor exit their trafficking situation and gets them into, flies them to wherever they need to go and gets them into safe housing. And so that is a critical piece. It's, when you break it down, it's dollars a day
Right.
that people are able to give to make an impact. And so I always want to underscore that, because for us to serve 1,500 survivors this year, there's $700,000 that we have to make up. So I need 700 people to give $1,000 this year to make up the deficit of what it's going to take for us to triple our impact in the number of survivors we serve. But there are always the opportunities to do something that is very hands-on for those that are local survivors that we help escape and get placed into safe homes. We oftentimes have what we call hope bags that we'll provide them. These are high quality backpacks. We don't take things that are flimsy or, teeny tiny travel size bottles, because that's what we give them tells them what we believe they're worth. And so we really try to deliver high quality bags with journals, with maybe a gift card to Target where they can, or to Walmart, where they can go buy clothes that they would want, new undergarments and different things, and we want to give them the power of choice to pick what it is that they want, because the traffickers have always been the ones determining their clothes and their nail color and everything. And so those bags can have Bibles, journals, gift cards, snacks, toiletries, full-size toiletries, and some other basic necessities. We've got a list of things like that on our website where people can go and create these hope bags. And that allows us to give something to them right as they're exiting, or as they're getting on a plane to travel to their safe home, that just says, hey, we see you and we know that this is hard and we just want to give you something for the journey. We'll also put blankets and loveys in there as well, or kind of a stuffy with them.
Nice.
Thank you so much for sharing with us this morning, Christy.
Of course.
You have given us something that we all need, and that's information, which leads to power. And power leads to getting these children and adults. I think that's a myth that is out there, is that it's just children. So thank you for sharing with us this morning, and we really appreciate your time.
And we're going to let you go ahead and attend to your boy's birthday, and then I'm going to have just a few minutes kind of wrap up on our end. But I thank you so much for taking your precious time today, and we wish you and Brittany and all the Safehouse Project crew success and blessings and abundance for this year, because I know you have some very lofty goals, but we know that God has no economic problems. So thank you so much for joining us.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Have a good day.
So wrapping up, this topic of human trafficking it's a heavy topic, and I know that Dana has mentioned that, and I agree. My husband and I, in fact, watched Sound of Freedom finally yesterday. Have you watched
No,
that?
I have not watched it yet.
Okay. It was a film that was uncomfortable to watch, honestly. As Christy said, it does deal with out of the United States issues, and it was uncomfortable to watch, and you know, I'm going to say to our viewers, this episode also might be uncomfortable to watch. The people who inspire and amaze us have the courage to ask, answer,
That's right.
and act. And we heard today from Christy Wells, who's one of those people.
Yes.
She was given an opportunity when she was 16 to see something
Right.
that disturbed her. And then later, she was given an opportunity to act.
That's right.
So human trafficking, slavery of any kind is hard to look at. But once you're exposed to it, you can't unsee it.
No.
She said that. You can't unsee it.
Cannot.
And you really, honestly, you can't unhear it. And this is how Safehouse was started. In fact, you mentioned, you know, we're seeing human trafficking everywhere, even billboards, right?
Billboards.
Yeah. So recently, a few days ago, Marsha Blackburn, who's a senator from Tennessee, was recently at a hearing addressing social media regulations with media mogul Mark Zuckerberg. Did you see that?
No, I missed that.
Well, she shared that every 2 minutes, a child is bought or sold for sex.
That just tears me up. I mean, that is just so upsetting.
Human trafficking is treating humans as a commodity, and you know that really breaks my heart. So the question is, does it break your heart?
Yeah, that's right.
And that's what I ask of our viewers. Does it break your heart? Does it make you emotional? Does it make you angry? And right now you might be saying, what can I do? Or better yet, what should I do? Well, Christy gave us some action items, a call to action, if you will. So my question is, will you act? Because ignoring this call, you may miss the opportunity to make a difference in somebody's world. It's everyone's different, and how we act and respond is going to look differently.
Yeah.
But I'd like to say today, let's take a moment, sometime today, not now, but sometime today, let's take a moment of silence or prayer for every human who is living in bondage. See them free, see them whole and healed, see the darkness of the world flooded with the light of love. That's my ask for today. And to our viewers, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to join us for this podcast.
I agree completely, and I love what you had to say. To see them surrounded by a love of light, because that's what they need.
Yeah, there's enough darkness in the world, and that's. I had asked my husband what he thought human trafficking, what it was, and he said, "Oh, it was the daily acceptance of evil in your life."
What a powerful thought.
Yeah. Well, thank you once again for dropping in, and we will see you next time for A Servant's Heart.
Servant's Heart. Thank you very much, everyone.
Bye-bye.
You've been listening to A Servant's Heart, sponsored by the Statesville Women's Club. We are located at 515 West End Avenue, Statesville. To contact us, you can email us at statesvillewomansclub@gmail.com or call 704-761-8208. Our website is statesvillewomansclub.org. Remember, that's Statesville Women's Club with an A.org.